Although he's better known as the king of podcasts nowadays, Joe Rogan has been closely intertwined with the UFC since 1997.
It's kind of hilarious that I'm a commentator for MMA.
Everyone back here is very excited, and I can't wait for this thing to get started.
His deep MMA insights, peppered with his trademark wit, made him one of the franchise's best color commentators.
He has landed several of those inside low kicks.
But how much do you really know about him? Stay tuned while we tell you 10 facts you probably didn't know about Joe Rogan. Number 10. His 2000 comedy album included a song called Voodoo Punani. Right off the bat, you might be surprised to hear that he came out with a comedy album at all. I mean, he's had a long career as a stand-up comedian.
And this dude lost control of his car and he's sliding through an intersection. And in the middle of the slide, he took a sip of coffee.
Straightened the ass end of his car out and got up on his merry way.
But with so much attention going towards his podcast, you might forget where he first started out. That said, the comedy album itself contains a gem of a song called Voodoo Punani.
We had a few laughs and a few white Russians. Laughs turned into feeling and touching.
And it's just as dirty and hilarious as you'd expect. Honestly, the most surprising thing about it is the cool blues vibe he's got going on, with his whispered vocals meshing in pretty well with the rest of the music. Number 9, he wants the UFC to go bare knuckle. I'll say one thing about Joe. He likes to go hard, and that's not just because of his morning ice baths. The entertainer has some strong opinions about the UFC, and possibly the most shocking one of all is that he wants fighters to stop using gloves.
Would you want there to be no gloves?
If fights had no pads, we would get a more accurate representation of what the body can really do.
His rationale is that fighters don't have padding on their elbows, knees, or any other areas that they strike with.
Why is it okay to elbow someone in the face, but it's not okay to have gloves that are like bare knuckle? That's crazy.
So why should their fists be any different?
MMA really shouldn't have gloves on.
Big Joe McCarthy pushed back against Rogan's statements. He said that the UFC has faced a long struggle with perception, and bloody bare-knuckle fights might give people the wrong idea. Honestly, my opinion is that the fighters won't be able to last very long if their hands get shattered in each fight, not to mention the extra damage the bare knuckles would cause. And that's what probably Joe Rogan wants to see. Number 8, he loves fanny packs. I think we can all agree, Joe Rogan is a man's man, but that doesn't stop him from loving perhaps the daintiest accessory you can think of, the fanny pack. He first brought it up in episode 858 of his podcast, where he expresses how much he admires Jesse Ventura for sharing his passion for the convenient storage pouches.
First of all, Mr. Ventura, I'm a big fan, but I'm an even bigger fan now that I know that you're pro fanny pack.
His guest offered a bunch of advantages to owning fanny packs, like how they're portable yet still able to fit a ton of items inside.
I'm a huge fan. Well, I carry my passport in it. I carry the things that I need to travel if I'm doing airline travel, my schedules.
But something tells me Joe likes them for the fashion. Macaulay Culkin came on the podcast in episode 1153, saying that Joe has a pretty snazzy leather pouch, which tells me that the host takes his fanny pack obsession very seriously. Number 7, his insane dream. Rogan has an affinity for psychedelics, and they've led to some wild experiences that he's talked about on the podcast. However, his strangest experience ever came to him in a dream. Basically, Joe fell asleep and ended up watching a werewolf and a gorilla get it on. Yep, you heard that right, and wait till I tell you how kinky things got.
And I had this dream that I was like sneaking around, like trying like the outside of the wall, hoping they wouldn't notice me. While werewolves was gorilla.
Now, I'm not one to judge, but I have trouble believing Joe went to bed sober that night. And if he wasn't on something, I have to wonder, what kind of crazy stuff is he into that inspires such, vivid encounters in dreamland? Number 6, he once fell asleep at the worst possible time. Look, say what you will about Joe, but the guy really doesn't shy away from work. He basically believes that hard work is the key to happiness, which is why he keeps himself so busy on a day-to-day basis. The thing is, sooner or later, your body's just going to give up to exhaustion. It turns out that's exactly what happened when Joe was trying to show his girl a good time. To be clear, Rogan fell asleep while giving his girlfriend oral pleasure. But in his defense, this was back when he held down multiple jobs to make ends meet. He started his mornings off with a paper route, spent the rest of the day helping out a private investigator, and kept his stand-up career going with nightly shows. After all that, I'm impressed he even tried. Number 5, he used to struggle to pay the bills. With his recent Spotify deal netting him $200 million in around 3.5 years, Rogan has a lot of money by this point. However, he wasn't always living in the lap of luxury. Not many people know this, but Joe had a really hard time making ends meet when he was first starting out. Stand-up can be a great gig, but you don't always know where your next paycheck might come from. As a result, Joe had to stay with his granddad in one of the worst streets in Newark for about 6 months because he was too broke to afford his own place. To make things worse, his car got repossessed at around this time as well, but Joe was able to grind his way out of poverty once and for all.
Is that hard times create hard men.
Number 4, he's a Taekwondo Champion. Even though he's never actually entered the octagon, Joe has shown time and time again that he knows how hand-to-hand combat works. That's not just a fluke either, because he was legitimate experience with the Korean martial art, Taekwondo.
First, I was obsessed, and I became a black belt in 2 years.
In fact, he won the full contact championship in Massachusetts 4 times in a row and went on to become the U.S. lightweight champion when he was just 19 years old.
Fought in a lot of Taekwondo tournaments. I won the Massachusetts State Championship 4 years in a row, and I won, I think it was called the American Open, which is a big tournament that I won.
He's long put his fighting days behind him, though, with constant migraines and injuries forcing him to call it quits. If he hadn't faced these setbacks, Joe might have become a bona fide martial arts legend in his own right. I guess he had to make do with commentating on real fights, which clearly worked out well for him in the long run. Number 3, he nearly fought Wesley Snipes. Apart from Taekwondo, Joe has considerable experience in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and kickboxing, which is why he answered the siren song of the UFC when it called to him. MMA is where his true passions lie, and he almost got the chance to prove his skills on the canvas against the unlikeliest of opponents. I'm talking about Wesley Snipes. Rumor has it that the actor was in a ton of debt to the IRS back in 2010, and his people thought that scheduling an MMA bout with Joe Rogan might help pay the bill.
I think he just needed money. He was in a bad situation where he owed taxes, and the government, they put him in jail.
Wesley's about an inch taller than Joe, but he weighs at least 10 pounds less. And he also doesn't have the same level of experience with hand-to-hand combat, so it would have been an interesting match up to say the least. Of course, the fight never ended up happening, but hey, maybe there's probably some strange alternate universe where Rogan defeated Blade himself. A guy can dream, right? Number 2, he became a UFC commentator for free tickets. Remember when I told you Joe could barely pay the bills in his early career? Well, despite that, he still wasn't interested in money when Dana White offered him a color commentator spot. Joe's the type of guy that prefers to watch the fights with his buddies and drink some beer, so Dana made him an offer he couldn't refuse. If Joe agreed to become a non-salaried color commentator, he'd get to bring all his friends in to watch the bouts for free. This turned out to be just what the doctor ordered, and Joe agreed to provide commentary on 15 fights before actually getting paid for it. Number 1, he's obsessed with death. Rogan seems really hooked on the topic of death. He's brought it up a bunch of times on his podcast. First off, he had this chat with Gary Laterman, a professor who knows a lot about death, religion, and all that stuff. They got into all sorts of things about what happens after we die and how people see death differently. Then, in a YouTube video called Joe Rogan on Life After Death, Joe talked with C.T. Fletcher, a scientist from MIT. They dug into what might happen after we die and those near-death experiences that some people have. In another video with the same name, he sat down with Michael Shermer, who's known for being pretty skeptical about stuff. They tossed around different ideas about the afterlife. And there's this one episode with author Sebastian Junger. They talked about Junger's own close call with death and how it changed his life. Also, he has expressed that his Instagram feed is all about people dying in very horrific different ways. Hey, but not to excuse him, every great mind comes with a touch or sometimes a lot of craziness. Which of these Joe Rogan facts surprised you the most? Leave a comment below and don't forget to like and subscribe. But that's all for today. See you next time. Till then, remember to protect yourself at all times.